said, my group is really focused on making observations in this rock. We use a number of different tools. We sample the water to look at tracers through the rock. We image the rock. We use geophysical tools to make measurements. I'll show you some of that today, or I'll try to breeze through some cool research results today. And so the questions that motivate what I'll share with you are, this fundamental question: how important is transpiration for trees pulling water from rock to the overall water cycle, the terrestrial water cycle? Is this an important flux, or is it really minor? Does it only happen during extreme drought? What is the role of, during drought, what is the role of this, bedrock water storage? And then how do, at the very end, I'll just touch on that cascading impacts idea of how trees impact carbon cycling in the rock, and thus weathering fluxes in water quality. And so to that first question, we recently wrote a paper, an undergrad in my group named Erica McCormick, pictured here, led a paper on quantifying this water storage capacity. And one way that we can do this is through a water balance, where we infer or calculate what this water storage might be to explain the amount of transpiration flux. And so what she sought out to do was to use literature compilation of any study that's reported water extraction from rock, as well as a large scale calculation that she used remotely sensed data sets for. And she put those things together to ask the questions: how common is it for plants to use water stored in rock? Is it limited to a particular place, to a particular type of tree species? And how often does this happen? Does it only happen during drought, et cetera? And so from her literature compilation, which of course was biased because it was only in English language literature, or literature that was translated, which presents quite a big limitation to us actually. She found that there isn't really a limitation on plants rooting in bedrock. And of course, the few studies that do report water extraction from rock tend to be in places that are water stressed, because it's of interest in those places to ask, where do the trees get their water when there's no rain? But there were studies in places that had really high rainfall that weren't water stressed that also showed water use from bedrock. So this suggested that this is actually a widespread phenomenon and not just limited to extreme cases. And so to do her water budget analysis to really assess how much plants are using, where, when, how often, she did this really clever calculation, drawing on some recent advances in how we estimate fluxes in the water cycle using remotely sensed data. And so she followed a couple of steps, and I'm not going to bore you with tons of detail, but she had to make a bunch of assumptions about what the data represent in order to come up, and a bunch of data that were collected by the Soil Service in the US. So our study, unfortunately, was limited. This part of the study was limited to the US because it's the only place that we were able to get this distributed data. She used very detailed soils data to show where the rock is really close to the surface, such that it will probably be part of the root zone. And then in those places, and those are all places that are shown here on this map, these are all places with really thin soils. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the topography and ecosystems of the US. You'll notice that the places that are underlain by rock also have a lot of topography. You can see the Appalachians, the Rockies, and they also are places that host a lot of biomass. So what she's showing here are forest and shrubland on rock. So it's a large fraction of at least this country, which is kind of the borders of this country from a geologic and from a scientific point of view are pretty arbitrary. But at least within our nation, there are a lot of places where there's a significant amount of biomass and rock is really close to the surface. So we can intuit that these ecosystems rely in some way on how this rock is structured, how it stores water, and potentially gives out nutrients. And so without going into too many details of the calculation that she did, We use effectively a water balance method that's done over really clever time stepping to try to understand the volume of water that plants have to take out of storage. So you can think about this as if we have a really long dry season or dry summer, say in California, where it's a Mediterranean climate with a distinct wet and dry season, all of the water that plants are returning to the atmosphere from the subsurface through transpiration during the summer, all of that water had to come from storage. So if I put a plastic bag over a tree, which I have done to sample for isotopes, but if I do that over the whole summer and I collect all of that water, the subsurface storage where that water came from had to be at least as big as the volume of water that I collected, because that water has to come out of storage if there's no fog, if there's no rain. So the minimum volume of that storage reservoir has to be the volume that was transpired. Now, if I look at transpiration data over a long time period, I can estimate, I can look at variability in the size of that storage reservoir, and I can try to estimate the maximum size of storage from the maximum amount of water that was pulled out. And so that's what Erica did over the continental US using a number of different satellite products. She compared this to on the ground data in some cases so that we made sure we weren't using some crazy numbers without calibration. And so she used these storage volumes, the total root zone storage capacity shown here as in the schematic as a black line. And then she subtracted our soil data set from the US Soil Survey, sorry, and then came up with what might be bedrock water storage. So really simple calculation. Granted, there's a lot of details involved, but fundamentally the calculation is really simple. And so she came up with maps of where substantial water from bedrock is being used by plants. And then she classified them into these different ecosystems or climate types. And really this slide, the point here is to say that, we found water use from bedrock, evidence for it across a large number of climates and biomes. This is not something that we can just say, okay, let's just ignore, humid areas. Instead, we think that, this is probably an important phenomenon across essentially anywhere that plants are underlain by thin soils or established in thin soils with rock underneath. And I just want to take a moment. I know if you look at this map, it looks like a lot of places that get a lot of rainfall are excluded. And a limitation of this study is that we can't, because we're looking at long periods with no rain, humid areas that get rain year round tend to not have long periods of no rain. And so that's a limitation of what we can look at with this type of data analysis. Of course, this limitation and our results suggest that we should look deeper and use other methods. And another interesting thing that Erica found in this study is that water is withdrawn not just during last resort drought periods, but also annually or more frequently than that across many, many places. And so the purple places here at some point in some years, but not others, plants used water from rock, and the green places, plants use water from rock every single year. And so this kind of defies our potentially some, assumptions that are made about water use from rock, that it's really just a last resort thing. And so we've shown that that's not really the case. And now we're moving into thinking about how this variability year to year impacts water cycling. And so I'm just showing you here maps. The colors are how much water is used from rock. And this is, we could spend the whole talk talking about all the caveats and all the limitations, but importantly, this is a lower bound, a minimum estimate, because the point of this project was to say, okay, what's the least amount that this reservoir could be impacting the water cycle, just to prove to ourselves and to our colleagues whether this reservoir is important. So it's all minimum estimates. And so the magnitude of the water storage is shown in the colors here. And then year to year, we have differences in how much water is used. And so we're using that information now in our studies in our research group. And I'm showing you here California and Texas because of how prevalent the water storage in rock is to the ecosystems there. And of course, for those who have been to these places, it's maybe not surprising at all. Driving around Texas, we see roots and rocks everywhere, and we also see a lot of biomass on the beginning of the Colorado Plateau here, where we're getting a lot of rain. There's not a lot of soils, but there's a substantial amount of biomass that the plants must be pulling water from rock. And so this is exciting to us because we're trying to understand how groundwater recharge in Texas and in California and stream flow in both places and spring flows are impacted by changing vegetation. And so this helps us to look at places we should focus on and what the temporal dynamics of water storages in these places.